This is Changeling the podcast.
Welcome to Changeling the podcast. Come for the glamour, stay for the vibes. I'm your host Josh, and with us is your other host Puka. Say hi, Puka.
Wonders and pleasantries.
What are we talking about today, Puka?
Today, we will be going through the third Kithbook of the original Kithbook series. Kind of straddling the line between first edition and second edition is Kithbook Nockers. And to discuss that Kith and some of their implications for the Changeling world, we have special guest Charles Siegel with us.
Welcome, Charles.
Hi, Changeling isn't my usual game, but I certainly have opinions on this book.
Huzzah!
We love opinions. Okay, so Charles, as you said, you're not that into Changeling, although we've been maybe getting you more.
Yeah, between you guys and Victor,
Yeah.
I've been more and more interested in Changeling. I just haven't done the sort of deep dive that I have with Mage and Wraith.
Okay. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself in relation to Kithbook Nockers?
So, I am what the Kithbook wants the Knockers to be. I'm a Jewish scientist,
Okay.
and I have opinions on both of those parts.
And you're also big in the world of
Yeah,
darkness.
I frequently appear on the World of Darkness podcast universe.
Yes. Also a lot of Storyteller Vault supplement. A lot of them. You're big in that world, I'd say.
And I try to help others get in there too.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So
How's your swearing?
My Yiddish is a bit rusty, but I don't know. I'm also kind of the opinion, and this is a place to start, that specific curses in things like the Knockers are less effective than comic book style censorship, where you just kind of mash a bunch of symbols and let the audience fill it in, because it both lets them pick whatever the most obscene thing they can think of is, and also it's funny by itself.
Yeah.
This is my strongest opinion on cursing and Knockers.
Yeah. And there's actually there is in this book a fair amount of word count devoted to that, which is we'll get to that.
Yeah.
Okay, so Kithbook Knockers was written by Christopher Howard and Ethan Skemp, although it says Christopher Howard is the big name and then Ethan Skemp is short story. Developed by Ken Cliff and Ian Lemke. And yeah, this is published in 1997. And as Puka said, it was definitely, you can tell it started development well before second edition core book came out, but it sort of seemed like it was developed along the same time.
We're back to having full color pages, and yet we have the second edition border and layout and everything. So I do also like how on the credits page we get a tilt at Team War Balloon, like right from the start.
Yes,
That's one. I'm going to keep count.
Yeah, so one of the positive thing would be, I know a friend of the show, Terry Robinson, would like the balloon quantity of this book. So this starts out with a story and a piece of art actually related to the story right before it.
Yep, this is presumably Ethan Skemp's contribution.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so this story I like.
Yeah, this was great. Like this was a great start to the book. It really had me hyped for what was next, even though I knew what was coming.
Yeah. So Puka, why don't you just give a brief rundown of what the story is?
Oh, sure. So it is the story of Brimstone Jill, who then became known as Blistertongue Jill, and the origins of the basilisk stones that can absorb all the swearing what knockers do. And much like the other Kith books, this is sort of a kind of adrift in time origin story for the knocker frailty, sort of. And Josh, I think it actually ties in better with your opinion that the knocker frailty is really one of perfectionism more than anything else. But it's sort of...
Yeah, or it should be.
Yeah. And it sort of talks about how knocker cursing was their way of like venting their frustrations when they were working on crafting. The basilisk stones were introduced to absorb that venomous energy which would otherwise destroy their creations. And then Blistertongue Jill was one of the foulest mouthed but most talented war machine creators of the knockers. So she gets hired by this duke named Owlsbane, who basically stiffs her on the giant war machine that she creates. So she goes to the basilisk stone and vents her spleen to the point that it shatters, all of the Knocker swears that were contained therein flood across the land, killing birds and plants and whatnot. But I do kind of like how the takeaway at the end of this is that the Knocker who created it was like, you know what? Just swear to your heart's content. Just do it. And that has defined the conception of the Knockers, at least according to this story, just as much as their crafting and the perfectionism, etc. So it's good.
Yeah, I like it a lot, and I will say that the perfectionism, cursing, and talent at building things often do go together in my experience.
Mm-hmm.
There's some study they did where they said people who swear above a certain frequency are demonstrably more creative or something, or maybe have a bigger vocabulary or both. But I take solace from that.
Well, at some point you kind of have to be, because otherwise you're just repeating the same like 3 words over and over and over again. You get bored with that.
Absolutely true.
Like, I know I've worked a few places where they take the software developers and they have to move them aside because everyone else gets annoyed by and other engineering type or developer types or whatever, maker types from the swearing that comes out.
Yeah, I have definitely seen people go into like the little 1-person phone booth offices just to let loose when their code's not working.
Yeah, I don't think I can do debugging without swearing. So that takes us into chapter 1, just us and the mechanical egg. And I'm suspecting, Charles, you're like me and thinking this is more of a mixed bag, this chapter, than the story.
Yeah. I don't know which side to focus on first. So I'll start with making Knockers kind of vaguely Jewish was a choice.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not a choice that I would have made.
Yeah, and it's definitely halfway Jewish, I'd say. Like if you look at the lexicon, so early on they have this whole lexicon, and it explicitly says it's a mix of 1940s Bowery slang, Yiddish, medieval English, and Irish, which is...
But then look at the actual lexicon.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's not. Considering that Knockers have shown up in significant numbers in New York in previous things,
Mm-hmm.
I would have very little problem if there was like a Yiddish word or two peppered in, along with a bunch of Italian and Irish and so on, and all the immigrant communities from, the pre-World War II era New York. But that's not what they did. It's close to what they said they did.
And they also
There is randomly one Spanish word.
Yeah.
But they also have the capital of Knockers or whatever is in Halifax, and I mean that's definitely not a Jewish community. Of the places in Canada, that's not where you'd pick. And also, why?
There's a very real possibility that the only best in Halifax is the Knocker one.
Yeah,
And the only requirement for that in Jewish law is 3 Jewish adults who know the law.
yeah.
So,
I mean, I don't know about the Jewish community in Halifax. It's definitely not known for this. It's not like New York City or Montreal or...
Well, but isn't Halifax also traditionally like an industrial center? Like historically, wasn't that part of Halifax?
It's a shipping center.
So,
Okay.
according to Google, in 2011, Halifax had about 2,000 Jews.
Yeah.
This is not a big community.
Yeah.
Slightly fewer than New York.
But it also doesn't make sense to me as a Knocker home in North America either.
Maybe it's where Chris Howard lives, and he just wanted to get it in there. Who knows why authors make the choices they do sometimes.
They have a pretty good physics department. That's about as close as I can get.
Yeah, if you want to lean in on the Jewish angle, you make New York the center. If you want to lean in on the building things, including big stupid things,
Mm-hmm.
and you want to stay in the U.S., Pittsburgh's right there.
Yeah, but they're not in the U.S. They're
I know.
Canada. Like if they had picked Montreal, at least, well, then the swear words would have been very different for one thing. But
Oh, I love Montreal swearing.
No, they probably had a Yiddish swear dictionary or something.
yeah,
And they only included like one word, swears. None of the like actually interesting curses. Like I'm not gonna throw the Yiddish at you, but like my favorite Yiddish insult, suggestion is, "May you have a sweet death, run over by a sugar truck."
mm-hmm.
Like that feels like something a knocker would say to someone.
Yep.
There's also the reference to Irish here reminds me of some of the old Irish curses that are things like "May the 7 dogs of hell bark in at your soul case" or something. But that's a proper curse. That's not just frustrated swearing.
Oh yeah, I'm picturing the handshake meme, Irish and Yiddish. on this topic.
There you go.
There's not one bit of medieval English in this.
Yeah.
Like looking through, I'm like, there is not one medieval English word. And then, of course, there's the Jewish concepts that are just built in. And it seemed like every time they had a choice to pick, that Chris Howard had a choice to pick a culture to draw from, to put something in, it was always Ashkenazi Jewish culture. Like, even to the point where Bezdin is the Ashkenazi Hebrew pronunciation of the word that comes through Yiddish. It's not the modern Hebrew or the Sephardic term. It's just specifically Yiddish. But then you also have, later on, we've got golems, we've got gematria.
Which they could have done the gematria thing if they wanted to. It didn't. It got appropriated before Kabbalah was invented.
Anyway. And that was quite a while ago. But in general, any one of these things would probably be less weird.
Mm-hmm.
But having all of them, and later in the book, he draws attention to a sanitized version of the myths that Knockers come from originally, where they are the ghosts of Jewish miners, which indicates that he does, in fact, know something about, like, he's doing this on purpose. It's not just like, oh, I like Jewish culture, so I'm going to make the Knockers Jewish. He knows that the original Cornish myths tie into this. And what he didn't include was why the ghosts are stuck in the mine, and that gets into very questionable territory.
It also kind of raises a question of anachronism, because there are references elsewhere in the book about Arcadian knockers versus earthbound knockers. And like any of the Kiths, knockers presumably have been around in some form for thousands of years. So, like, to tie it to that really very specific myth, specific in place, and I imagine pretty specific in time, like you could probably trace when that myth arose, it seems weird to have that be the dominant thread, or in some places the only thread that's running through the write-up here.
Well, it also like, when it explicitly talks about the myth, it's to say, it's like the author is skeptical of that being the origin, but he keeps bringing it up.
Well, at this point in this chapter, he is. And elsewhere,
I think that the funniest part of it too is that when the Knocker myths came from Cornwall to the U.S., which is and North America in general, which is where basically all of this is set, the Jewish connection disappeared entirely. Like no one looks at, like, no one goes to West Virginia and talks about Tommy Knockers and thinks that there's Jews involved. So all around, it's a strange choice.
Yeah, but trying to think about the motivation of why he might have done this. Like, reading through this, I was trying to kind of pinpoint that idea, like, why did this work its way in and become so prominent? And I can imagine that he started with Goblin Town, which was his write-up in Freeholds and Hidden Glens about the giant knocker freehold under Manhattan, and then followed that to Golems, which, to be fair, if you're going to give them to any Kith and Changeling, it would probably be the Knockers, because they're the ones who do the crafting. And then just kind of the significance of Ashkenazi Jewish immigration to New York specifically. So like those pinpoints, and then the miner story. But all of that, I keep feeling like it's fine to have it all there in some form, I guess, but to like lean so hard into it and go down these research rabbit holes and be like, let's get gematria in there too. Yeah, like you said, that was a choice.
It's the gematria, it's the patent office being the Hebrew phrase for like seat of judgment or seat of justice, and having almost all of their slang be derived from, like, no one who doesn't speak Yiddish or isn't from New York specifically says the word mishigas.
Right.
Yeah. Like, looking at this, having schlock makes sense to me.
Schlock is fine. Glitch is fine, because glitch is also Yiddish.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, it means to slip. So it comes from machines breaking, which perfect. Like, I'm fine with that, because also glitch has become part of the general English lexicon. But like, if you're watching someone on TV and they have a character say bupkis, they're telling you something about the character.
And then there's that picture on page 15.
Ah, yes. Infamously.
Which is one of those fun stories of the word means shit in Yiddish, and that's what was in mind. But a different word that is spelled the same has become prominent on the internet in the last few years.
Yeah.
I won't say that picture hasn't aged well, but it's certainly aged in a direction.
Yes. My favorite piece of art in the book isn't until page 22, and we'll get there.
So I was just going to give like a brief.
Yeah, so we should probably actually talk about the history as written here somewhat.
Yeah.
History is a very loose word because it kind of flies through thousands of years of it without really stopping to catch its breath.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly compared with some of the other books.
Yeah, it's basically the geek myth, I'd almost call it. Like the way they describe Nockers is like everyone else beat them up and no one liked them until they learned how to make really good tools and weapons, and then they got a bit of respect out of it. That's how
I wonder how much of that is attempting to kind of wink and nudge in the direction of anti-Semitism. It's hard to see anything like neutrally once you realize just how pervasive, oh, the Nockers are Jewish is in this book.
Yeah.
But also it's unclear how much of it is intentional, how much of it is just unconscious bias, and how much of it is coincidence at times.
There's things in this, if you do read it that way, and it's like, okay, that's forms of anti-Semitism I'm not aware of, which doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but I'm like, the extreme swearing, like, is that one that comes out that Jewish people swear all the time?
Yiddish does have a reputation as a good language for swearing, but it's not like a long-standing stereotype that I'm aware of. I'm much more concerned about the fact that throughout the book as a whole, Nockers are portrayed as pretty greedy.
I was going to say the thing about when we get to the Sealy Code and the sort of monetary terms in which things like debts are discussed, I was like, I just want to tear this page out.
It's very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Very uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. But again, we'll get there. I think actually, Charles, you had commented in the process of preparing for this episode, man, it just gets worse as you go, doesn't it?
Yeah, though at some point my ire did switch from really that about Judaism to really that you're that wrong about science.
Well, and on that note, we do have a sidebar about Leibniz, so...
Oh, God. So the claims in the sidebar are factually incorrect. Newton did not, in fact, steal credit for calculus from Leibniz. They did, in fact, independently discover it. There are so many thousands of reasons that a changeling can hate Newton. You don't need to make one up.
Yeah, that's not even the myth that Newton stole it. The myth was that Leibniz stole it. Like that's
the popular conception is that Leibniz stole it. The truth is that Newton did it, but didn't publish it, but he published results based on it, so we know he had it from historical analysis. Leibniz published it, and then Newton said, well, that's nothing special. I've already had that for 20 years. And then continental and English, physics and math went their separate ways, mostly cursing at each other and occasionally sending death threats. Newton wasn't a cool dude. He was kind of a big, giant asshole. There's a reason that Mage has a book that says that he was a technocrat and everyone hated him, and then he was finally shot and killed in the 1930s, which is the single best use of a historical figure in the world of darkness, I'm just going to say. Because it is completely accurate. Everyone hated Newton. No one hated him more than his friends. So yeah, there's so many reasons for changelings to hate Isaac Newton. Why make one up? It's just a weird choice.
And they could have even just taken this and tweaked it slightly, and then it'd be correct.
And the best part is that, ironically, Leibniz's version of calculus is the one that won. That's the one that we teach in college these days.
So when calculus is taught in college, because I've never taken calculus at the college level, do they also cover monadology? Because that's also attributed to him in this sidebar.
No one covers monadology, maybe except for in some philosophy classes that are mostly about, well, this was kind of incoherent.
I'd love to take that class.
Yep. Monad is a word throughout philosophy and mathematics and various that...
Oh, yeah.
I can't see any through line for it. Like, it gets used in,
group theory.
Group theory. I was thinking of the thing that gets used in functional programming all the time.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's the same usage. A monad is a set with an operation that is associative.
The thing that's like a burrito.
Yeah, kind of. More or less.
That was a famous talk. Somebody said that. Infamous talk.
Yeah. The thing is, monad is just sort of a noun form of mono. So it comes up independently in dozens of places.
Mm-hmm.
There's only so many ways for turning things like mono into nouns.
Yeah, it's also used in theology and all. Anyway.
Well, that I think has more to do with Leibniz than the math use does.
Yeah.
But we'll talk about monads later.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So for the history, we have more about the Accordance War than the entirety of the Industrial Revolution and the 20th century, both of which seem like they would be pretty relevant to Nockers. But page 17 does flat out say, here we have direct quote, technology doesn't equal banality. It's that simple. So there you go. That's probably the most useful piece to take out of this chapter. Yep. That and the pin-up picture of King David on that same page.
Oh, one more thing I just want to draw attention to for a moment. We've talked about how Jewish the Nockers are. Take a look at what they actually mentioned about World War II.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I was like staring at that paragraph like, that's it? That's all you're going to say? This is just an odd...
Like you would think that this would be, with how clearly this intends to tie Nockers to the Jewish community,
Yep.
even if you're focusing even on the American Jewish community, you'd have something to say about, the things in World War II that weren't Manhattan Project.
They do have that later for one of the characters, but that didn't have to.
Just even an acknowledgement that something important happened to the Jewish community during World War II.
I almost get the feeling from that paragraph in particular, but then this chapter as a whole, like maybe this was almost certainly this was written after there was that authorial choice to link the Kiths so closely to Judaism. And almost realizing, like getting to World War II and being like, oh no, I'm not at all qualified to write about this. I'll just skip it, And it's just like, should that not have been a flag that maybe this was not the direction for you to go in? So.
Yes.
Yeah. And the thing is, page 16, which there's a lot to talk about on page 16 alone. We've got the World War II bit, we've got Leibniz and Newton, but we also have the first mention of crossover.
Yes.
We have the Brethren of Aether.
Which I like that they hang out. I mean, it makes total sense.
There are many times where the world of darkness fails to make sense because two subgroups that would absolutely interact with each other never mention each other.
Mm.
It is weird how far out of its way werewolf books go to never say Dreamspeaker.
Yeah, this seems like... Actually, does Mage ever mention... Do you recall Mage ever mentioning Nockers when talking about the...
Of course Mage doesn't. The myths make sure.
Yeah. It's always... Yeah, there's a lot of like... Because there are other World of Darkness books that talk about Changeling, and then you have the Changeling stuff, and it's not the same. It doesn't go both directions. Yeah.
More generally, though, one of the things that I found really frustrating about this, and any Kith book that kind of elides the role of the Changelings kind of in the mortal world. So there's a fair number of words spilled on how the Nockers are kind of resistant to banality because they've always been close with technology, and they've always been close with mortals. And that kind of has helped them keep pace with change in the autumn world more than a lot of other Kiths. And that, I feel like, is a really meaty, valuable thing to dig into. And when you're looking at it from a historical perspective, the Industrial Revolution part is criminally short. There could have been talk about, during the interregnum, working within craft guilds or the age of inventions, all of that stuff. And it's just not mentioned, like any of it. So it's just, the Enlightenment sucked. Okay. And then we have sidebars on profanity. And the profanity.
Yeah, that's the other thing in this. Like, beforehand and afterwards, it might be like offhand saying, oh, Nockers swear a lot or something. This just really digs into it in a way that I don't... Like, it's like gives them a second frailty or something.
Well, it actually gives them a bit of a birthright in this final sidebar because they have the one swear word in their brains that if they invoke it, it does chimerical damage equal to their glamour to everybody within hearing range. So
yeah.
Armor does not protect against this damage and it cannot be soaked. That's huge. That's like giving Sloa the ability to see ghosts, which made more sense. But
it's also just so blatantly an English speaker made up a word.
Right.
Like, it just stinks of like 7-year-old sat down and threw some syllables together and pretended it was obscene.
Do you know what it actually reminds me of the most is Joe Pesci in the Home Alone films. Just kind of like muttering incoherently to himself as he like staggers around the house. At least we get another flying machine at the end. Not a balloon, but...
Yep. An ornithopter.
Yeah. With a claw and Gatling gun.
I think it also has a ray gun.
Yeah, that looks like a ray gun to me.
Yeah. A Gatling ray gun, perhaps.
Now that's Knocker tech.
Yep.
Yeah, and it takes us into a picture of
a Knocker classroom with a very Harry Potter looking kid in the middle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This book came out the same year that the first Harry Potter book did, and two different portrayals of goblins as Jewish.
Yeah.
And I know goblins are a separate thing in Changeling, but Knockers are still kind of goblinish.
Not really a separate thing.
Yeah,
They're Thaline Knockers.
yeah, they're different enough that they have their own that the word goblin is also a term in Changeling.
Yeah. But no, even before this, they did establish knocker. Goblin as a term for unseelie knocker was established way before this book.
Similar to ogres and trolls.
Wait, for unseelie knocker
Well, first for unseelie knocker, and then when they invented the Thaline, that's where they called the Thaline that.
I can never keep track of the various types of Changeling that all end in lane.
Thaline are the bad ones.
Thaline are the bad ones. Galane are just not Kithane, right?
Yep.
Right. Chapter 2. Axles, Gears, and Grease. Society.
In which we learn that unseelie knockers apparently outnumber seelie ones by 3-2. Okay.
Mm-hmm. We didn't have the ratio before, but we did have more unseelie than seelie. They're one of the sealie.
Do other Kithbooks give like ratios like that?
I can't recall any. I mean, red caps maybe because they're like the traditionally all unseelie ones, but otherwise,
Like I will say, it does seem at least somewhat thematic to me for the Knocker book to have the most numbers in it.
Yeah.
And giving a ratio like 3-2 is a much more reasonable thing to do than any time that World of Darkness gives a population number.
Or a weird percentage with too many points of 23.7% of knockers are sealie. Yeah.
Like 40%-ish, whatever. Yeah. Plus or minus a point of glamour.
So we get some info about the courts. And I found this chapter's tone a little bit weird. It's like semi-in character, which gets distracting. I don't know what to do with that, but it's a feel. And this is where some of the awkward stuff comes in again as it kind of goes through the knockers' attitudes towards the sealie code and the unsealie code.
Yeah, it's where a lot of the greed stuff really comes in, but we kind of already mentioned that, so I don't feel a need to address it in more detail. Love that the knockers are canonically Evangelion fans on page 22.
Yes.
This book came out contemporaneously with the first English translation of Evangelion also. 1997 was a year.
It's a lot going on. It's a little strange how there's very little about actual knocker society, like how they interact with each other, how they interact with the idea of the Escheat or other parts of Changeling society. We get perspectives on other Kith, which are about as frustrated and venomous as one would expect from a knocker stereotype section. Stereotypes they have, that is. But yeah, like
a significant fraction of which have nicknames for them in Yiddish, just
right.
Noting and moving on.
Just to reinforce that point, I do like that they're mentioned to be some of the most fashion of all changelings. I like that being in there.
Yeah, that's honestly great, and as far as I can tell, doesn't come from anywhere that's questionable. So So your knocker should be dressed like an absolute lunatic and making it look good.
Yes, gears everywhere, or something.
No, it's just elaborateness. That's the
Knockers definitely look at the steampunk aesthetic in clothing and think, well, that's a boring way to dress. Where's the color? Where's the flash?
I like the knocker fashions borrow from every age, combine the elegance of high sheave voile with the decadence of 17th century front court and the quirkiness of mod and new wave movements.
I'm trying to visualize that, and it's difficult, but I'm into it. I mean,
yeah.
Very, very briefly, just to kind of summarize the stereotypes that are listed, the knockers, I think it's fair to say,
really hate boggins.
They loathe the boggins,
or they're very horny for boggins.
Well, they don't like the competition and the toy making, apparently.
Well, no one's ever been horny for someone they hate, but boggins they mostly hate and view as competition because there's already a kith that kind of covers basic tinkering.
Yeah, and that was fun to play in a LARP. I find that's something I bring in. I like doing is the rivalry between boggins and knockers, with most of the boggins going, what are the knockers doing?
I think you might have actually been thinking of satyrs because they kind of just hate Puka also. They kind of hate everyone.
Yeah.
Which I think was unnecessary.
Well, they're afraid of Slua to some extent.
Yeah.
Which I think is sensible.
I think part of this is there was a bunch of stuff about knockers that were established before this book. I can't say there was never any kind of Jewish connection, but like this is like way more than anything before this book. But then they bringing in the other stereotypes from knockers that they've already established, it does not go well.
Yeah.
Like, before this really doubled down on Jewishness, how much did the Knockers just hate everyone?
Oh, that was already there. They were
Okay.
not. They were supposed to be super cranky, cankerous, always criticizing.
Cranky doesn't mean hates everyone, though, and this
No.
doesn't come off as I'm grumpy about Puka. It comes off as I wish harm upon them.
Yeah, that had some of it.
And
Yeah.
I think that's unnecessary, honestly. I can tell you that if I were, in a game playing a Knocker, yeah, I would absolutely be playing the one-sided rivalry with the Boggins to the hilt.
Mhm.
I'd probably be mildly annoyed at Puka, but that was the most. I'd go like this. Now a Puka slipping on a banana peel and gouging his eyes out on scraps of rusty iron. That's comedy. No, that's unnecessary.
Yeah, that was.
And I probably would also, and that's just because I'm me, switch the weird, hate, horny for opinion of the satyrs and put that on Slua.
Yeah,
which the satyrs do as well.
That works.
Well, the satyrs do that for everyone, though.
Yeah, but especially the Slua. The Slua are like the ultimate challenge or whatever it is.
But like, picture a Knocker and a Slua, and you've got kind of the garish, brightly colored fashionista.
Yeah.
And the goth.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a trope for a reason.
I mean, Lord knows I've been there enough times.
Yeah, absolutely hate the she. Everyone should hate the she. And the trolls would annoy them. I can definitely see the trolls annoying them, but I think Puka would mostly annoy, trolls would mostly annoy. Slua, they would hate how much they want them.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not even objecting to writing it in a visceral tone because the Knockers speak in that way.
Mm-hmm.
But it's coming across less as tone and more as content, how much they just dislike everyone. And
yeah,
I find misanthropy is boring.
Unless there's a good reason behind it.
Misanthropy for one character can be interesting, but misanthropy applied to an entire splat.
Yeah. And there was, I can't remember where it was later in the book. There was an author some voice being really horny for Puka, but I can't remember.
It's in the courtly love section. We'll get there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not like this is one voice, but
well, that's the thing. It's like I said, it kind of goes back and forth between in character and out, and it's sometimes like the stereotypes are all quite clearly in character, but then it sort of dips back out. So
yep,
But we get opinions on Galen and
Fubars. Which does this mean Fubars are Galen?
Well, it's Galen and others. So yeah, they're Chimera.
Yeah.
And golems.
Yeah.
Like the prodigals are all. It's hard to tell what the font size is, but I think prodigals might also be a subset of others, or maybe it's the same level. That's the same level header. Then again, it's not like White Wolf was careful about header sizes. Generally speaking, a little weird calling them Fubars. I'm just gonna say, doesn't fit to me.
Mm-hmm.
Will o' the Wisps, being basically a little chimerical power source.
Mm-hmm.
I'm cool with that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
The book lampshades why something was a bad naming decision, though.
Yeah.
Golem, to make a golem, not to be confused with the inanimate race of the same name, then maybe you should not have used the word golem so many times.
No, well, then they ended up being glomes, so it's like they changed it maybe because of this book. I don't know. But
there is no anime called golems, no.
Okay, that's funny. Also, they shouldn't call something an automata. Not that hard to.
Yeah, robots.
But D&D has convinced everyone that golems are a general thing instead of a specific thing.
Right.
Yeah, like they're not a robot. Like, they should have some sort of Clockwork Man type thing. Like, that would be cool. And not what golems would bring up. And yeah.
The author's clearly aware of the original story, the old stories. I don't want to say original because golems actually appear in documents that are about 2,000 years old. But Rabbi Lowe was hundreds of years ago and references it, and that's a thing that they included. Sure,
choices were made.
So prodigals.
The vampire ones, that kind of makes sense.
The werewolf ones also kind of make sense, I guess. They mentioned the glasswalkers at least, which is like, out of all of the werewolves, those are probably the ones they'd bump into the most.
I like that the Knockers are aware of Victoria Station.
They visited it, sort of, or they've seen it.
And they call it a very cool satellite. They've buzzed it.
There's some metaphysical questions in this book that...
Yes.
Oh, I also like the book consistently throwing out just a ton of origin stories for the Knockers that are just completely contradictory, and almost all of them are clearly not correct.
Mm-hmm. That's just Changeling.
Okay. I appreciated that because, yeah, it does draw, like right here, under Ghost, it draws attention to that Cornwall myth, but then it's also saying maybe we're from Atlantis, maybe we're from a planet between Neptune and Pluto, maybe we're the leftover shavings when trolls were made.
Yeah.
I like it throwing out all of those things.
There is a nice note at the start of the history chapter as well, where they basically say, let the other Kiths claim to be the first ones. We don't really care. We don't really care where we came from. And it's a little refreshing to kind of see that.
Yeah, that's refreshing across World of Darkness. Like, how many tradition books start with, well, we were first. Right. And Iteration X claims to have come first. Come on.
With their invention of hand axes and fire.
Tool use. And our rivals are the Dream Speakers, who also did that. Like, well, okay.
Yeah.
Across World of Darkness, everyone seems obsessed with being the first and the oldest. And I'm like,
why?
Okay, who cares? Like, at most recent, that was thousands of years ago. What have you done lately?
Mm-hmm.
How do I make a game out of, well, maybe we were first in the Pleistocene?
I'm sure you could, but...
And maybe you even have the question of, was there a Pleistocene? But that's a separate issue.
Yeah. And then we get into...
Knocker Society, which is mostly about Knocker science.
Do you have opinions on this, Charles?
Did that sigh come through?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot going on here. But this section is where where that switch flipped in my brain from, what are you saying about Jewish stuff, to, have you ever heard of science?
Which is impressive because it's still saying a lot of things about Jewish stuff.
Yeah, but this is the same sort of stupid things about Jews that, like, Crowley was saying 100 years ago. Like, it's not part of the bundle of Jewish goblin nonsense that has been coming since 1999 and has not stopped to this day.
Mm-hmm.
You know what they really should have thrown in a mention of here? The Antikythera mechanism.
Oh, beautiful.
Antikythera mechanism.
Yeah.
I think that would have fit really nicely into this section.
Yep.
Instead of the entire sidebar on how much Newton sucks?
You know what? A sidebar on how much Newton sucks is fine. I think that's a good thing and that more books should include them because Newton did really suck.
I think it's fine in principle, but not at the expense of more useful stuff to the game. That's my opinion.
It's also not about how Newton sucks. It's about how Newtonian physics sucks.
Also, I'm just going to draw some attention to the last paragraph and note that it says, there's a formula that sits somewhere between Einstein's theories of special and general relativity. Special relativity deals with the world of microscopic physics, atoms, electrons, quarks. General relativity is about the realms of astrophysics and cosmology. The two contradict each other in many ways. No.
If you just think of all of this as in character and it's just a knocker who has really low background in academics and science, fine. But
no. Like, this part is one of the less in character sections.
Yeah.
Yep.
For the listeners who don't have scientific background, special relativity is just general relativity without gravity. They are not just compatible, but one is built on top of the other. What the author meant was quantum mechanics.
Yes.
But the author did not understand that they meant quantum mechanics. And when they start talking about things that are part of quantum mechanics, it shows.
Yeah, they're just talking about special relativity. Yeah.
But that's another 2 pages down that we start seeing them, screwing up quantum mechanics per 2.
Something else that we get on page 27, which I feel like might be an interesting connection not only to Mage, but also, Charles, to a Storyteller's Vault supplement that you produced. So the Knockers, some of them at least, have come across a realm that they call the Hieronymus Continuum, which is, I guess, the dreaming / maybe umbral equivalent of the Platonic realm. It's not very thoroughly described, but do you see any potential for connection there?
That struck me as a reference to, there is a realm in Mage, I think it's in the Book of Worlds already, that is an umbral realm of invention. And I would imagine that if you can cross between the Umbra and the Dreaming, that would be a way to do it. Like, the connection between these two places. But yeah, it does also have a bit of Platonic realm to it. As you mentioned, I detail several parts of the Platonic realm in a Storyteller's Vault supplement called Paradigm Explored, Number and Shape, which is about mathematics as magic. If you just want some vocabulary for knockers to throw around, it's on Storyteller's Vault. If you want to play a mage who does mathy things, well, again, it's on Storyteller's Vault.
Link will be provided in the show notes.
With that delicious, delicious affiliate code.
Yes. Then we get into astronomy. Oh, and there's also a Steam Tech sidebar, because of course there is. But then we get into astronomy.
I had no significant problems with the astronomy section. It didn't add much for me, I think.
It didn't add much for me because I thought it was way too short. I feel like there was so much potential here. This is basically, to me, like this could have been how to run a Knocker Spelljammer game, and then it wasn't, and I was annoyed.
It certainly couldn't be in 2/3 of a column,
Right.
which is what it combines across 2 pages. Like, I'll say, if you go over to Werewolf the Podcast and listen to me help review Rage Across the Heavens, I rave about how great the Garu astrology section is. Having a Knocker astronomy section that is as detailed as that would have been amazing.
Yeah.
2/3 of a page, like a paragraph of which is just like Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler. They happened. You could have just cut this. It didn't add anything really.
Yeah. I do like its connection, though, to the note earlier where they whether or not you buy this or want this in your game, where they say Knockers after World War II got involved in the space race, and so they sort of indirectly claim credit for the resurgence. I mean, that would have been something to explore.
See, if you want everyone to hate the Knockers,
right?
If you want everyone to hate the Knockers, have everyone who's mad about the She blame the Knockers for the resurgence.
Yeah.
Although the resurgence is, yeah.
It did bring a lot of glamour back into the world too, though, and reopen the dreaming. So, silver linings.
Yeah.
Pluses and minuses.
Yeah.
But with the way that they're portrayed as, antisocial and everyone hates them and they hate everyone back, you could have done something with this.
Yeah.
Speaking of pluses and minuses, though, on the next page, we have some flavors of monads as we get into talking about what's basically Knocker particle physics. Thoughts?
I have sighed again.
Yes.
So, it's hard to tell where to begin. I'll start with some petty things. It is weird that two of the pairs of monads are directions and the other pair are not. It is also weird that quarks do that, so I get the reference. That they're not over and under. This would be a great place to bullshit something about 4 dimensions and the dreaming, but they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Just for people who don't know these terms outside of this, you've got the 6 cardinal directions, forward, back, left, right, up, and down. And you should think of Anna and Kata as if there were another direction you could move in, it's forward and back in that direction. So it's a 4-dimensional nonsense. Really a great place to put some just absolute technobabble about the dreaming.
Yeah, the weird and strange being truth and Gilgal.
Yeah, so I probably have to explain Gilgal and what it is in World of Darkness. So Gilgal is a Hebrew word. It means cycle, and it usually means the cycle of reincarnation of souls. It also is a word in Mage for essentially the complete obliteration of a soul, which is perhaps the most incorrectly translated word ever. And the World of Darkness has a lot of examples in there. Also weird to stick it here, especially in contrast with weird. I also want to note that the weird monad, which is apparently connected to the truth quark, quote, long sought by human physicists, was isolated in 1995. I did a quick Google for news articles, quarks, and 1995, and it was actually all over science reporting that it had been isolated. So we're running into a little bit of, well, Wikipedia didn't exist yet, so research was harder.
Yeah. Well, Google didn't exist even.
Yeah,
well,
and Google didn't exist yet. And even if
web crawling this is hard.
Yeah.
You could Alta Vista it, maybe.
I was also reminded of that by the Heisenberg uncertainty principle section, because that metaphor about the billiard ball, I'm pretty sure that's exactly how it was explained to me in 9th grade science class and then was never mentioned again. So
yeah, someone had a 9th grade science textbook, misreferenced a few things. So while I do like the idea that the Knockers are trying to understand and essentially classify how the dreaming and glamour works, do they suggest that this work might in and of itself be banal to every other changeling?
Yeah. Well, they were saying, they go through that. The other one I said, science and technology is not banal, full stop. And they suggest in this part that science and banality is banal.
It's trapped between 1st and 2nd edition Changeling, and honestly, I would actually think it'd be a really interesting plot hook if Knocker investigation into glamour was glamorous for Knockers, but a banality trigger for everyone else, leading to tension.
Yeah.
But banality triggers don't exist at this point in the game as individualized things.
Yep.
So they couldn't do that. Yeah, it's interesting that they attempted to do this. I would have made it more by analogy with quarks rather than basically the same thing as quarks, to the point of up, down, and truth are all the names of quarks. I should say truth is a British English name for the quark. In American English, it's called top. Yeah, it's top and bottom in American English, and truth and beauty in British English.
Aw.
And I assume that most of the Commonwealth follows Britain's terms.
I mean, they should have made weird strange. Like that at least would have.
Yeah. The other thing is that there are strange and charm quarks, and strange does not pair with truth. So that's also a very choice. It's a very choice. This book is full of very choices.
Yes. That being said, I do find it charming that the attempt was made. I like the idea of the Knockers being
I think it's important to note that I find no charm on this chart.
fair.
You'd think with the way that Changeling and this book in particular talks about Knockers are ugly, but then there's all this courtly romance stuff and so on. They would, if they're going to go this closely with quarks, they would have used beauty.
Yep.
The science stuff comes into two parts. There's the incorrect, when it's really easy to get it right. I can forgive the author for not knowing that's about a discovery from 2 years earlier. That happens. But things like the special relativity, when you mean quantum mechanics, should have been caught by someone in an ideal world. And then there's things that are just like this 6 monad sidebar, which is just a missed opportunity. Like I could rewrite just this sidebar, and I think we could end up with something just a lot cooler and more flavorful, and that is a better commentary on how changelings relate to science.
This sounds like potential for a storyteller. We say this too much, but potential for a storyteller.
Add it to the list.
Yes.
I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do with Knockers in one of my projects, so I will consider this for that.
The other thing that I wondered about this is it kind of makes sense to have like this physicsy stuff in Kithbook Knockers, but also to me, I don't think that has to be exclusively Knocker. But
oh yeah, and I don't know how generally the other kiths relate to science in the modern world. After all, most of my Changeling experience is 2nd edition, in which case the relationship of non-Knockers to science is mostly run and hide. I know C20 fixed that, which I'm glad about, and from your reviews of books, I know 1st edition didn't include it. It's just a weird 2nd edition artifact.
Well, it's also not as completely absolute in 2nd edition either. There's other threads of that, like...
I guess what I'm saying is, I'm not sure, what does a troll physicist look like?
Yeah, pick first as a satyr physicist, probably, based on... But that's, we'll get to that book later.
I think that we can all agree that satyrs would be in biology first.
Something that has stood out to me kind of going through this book, it's a very Chris Howard book. I don't know how else to put it, but it definitely shows all the hallmarks that I've come to associate with his writing, which is there are great ideas on every page. They're just not always fleshed out, and instead they get obfuscated by kind of the research rabbit holes that he seems to enjoy tumbling down without thinking too much about the repercussions of what it will mean to the reader. At the same time, he also kind of has his own personal meta plot that weaves through this. So there's references in here to stuff that I don't think we ever see in any books except his, like Denizens of the Dreaming or Freeholds and Hidden Glens. The Goblin Town sidebar on page 31, as we get into looking at Knocker Freeholds, it takes that chapter of his from 2 years prior and updates the storyline. So yeah, that's just something that stood out to me while reading this. But then we have more about the other freeholds as well. Lots of wooden flooring, MC Escher stuff, booby traps.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you. Seeing there is plenty of good stuff here. I don't want to say that this book is just bad. It's got some bad things in it, some very poorly considered choices in it, but overall, I'd say that the worst part of it is, here's an idea, moving on. Here's the next idea. Well, could you develop that one a little bit? Maybe tell me a second sentence. If we go to page 32, we see the Hieronymus continuum, 2 paragraphs, then the Hollow Earth, quarter of a column, and then social structure, and you're just hit in the face with Besdin again.
Yeah, but meanwhile, we had an entire column on the 6 monads. So
yeah, part of the thing I was reading this, I'm this is not a mage book. Let's suppose that sidebar worked well, right? I still don't know how I'd use it in Changeling.
I was just kind of thinking, like, depending how long of a timeline led up to this book's creation, it would be interesting if there had been some significant etherite thing. As we've discussed before, certainly there was cross-pollination in the office between the Mage writers and the Changeling writers, directly or indirectly. So I'm wondering if someone was like, oh, you're doing Kithbook Knocker, you got to make it work like the etherite tradition book.
In the mid-90s, you had, in particular, Brocado was bouncing between Changeling, Mage, and Werewolf. Mostly Mage, but he was definitely a line tying ideas from one to the next.
Yeah, he's not in the credits page of this one, which is actually surprising because he's on the credits page for most of the Changeling books, like additional material by, special thanks to, etc.
It looks like the last Changeling book he touched was second edition core.
Oh.
According to his entry on the White Wolf Wiki, he developed Isle of the Mighty, had materials and contribution to second edition core, and got special thanks in Kithbook Trolls and immortalized the toy box. And that was it for Changeling. But he was still bounced. I'm actually shocked that he didn't at least get a thanks in Kithbook Satyr.
I think some of those might have been left off. Like, I think the wiki page might be incomplete because I feel like we've seen his name pop up more often than 4 or 5 times. But account will ensue later. Speaking of the Knocker social structure, let's just skip right over the based in part.
I just want to say, there is a thing that bugs me about that too, is the banality of patent laws. Just anyway, that's just the other thing.
Yeah.
It's totally separate from the cultural appropriation. I just don't like Knocker patent laws and stuff. That doesn't seem right to me.
Yeah, that's a weird choice, just going with patent law. And again, more Hebrew terms. Dayan is judge in Hebrew. Just strange choices all around. The guilds are cool.
Yeah,
I like
the
them.
guilds are actually one of the most useful pieces of the book, probably.
I'm a weirdo who loves. I'm the weirdo who loves sub factions and sub factions and sub factions.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's weird at all. I mean, I think it's it's great to have this because otherwise Knockers are just undifferentiated within this book. They're bad-tempered tinkerers.
I find it kind of disappointing that this book is I guess organized in the first and second edition Splat book style, not the revised edition style, because then each of these guilds would have had a 2-page spread.
Right.
And at some point that might be too much. There'd be like a little art piece. They'd have and so on, and that's fun.
At least one of these is not Knocker, the monkey's paw. Like that was around beforehand, right? Like it's
at least not only Knocker.
Oh, Knockers can be in it, yes, but it's not like a knock. I wouldn't call it a Knocker group. That's what I meant.
Yeah.
And I know that it's definitely intending to lean towards a different sort of Knocker than I have in my head, but I am picturing a Knocker in literally that war machine that is on page 34, trying to be an assassin, and I'm just loving that.
Nice.
You have to kill your target. Okay. Do not just destroy the building they're in. I wasn't just going to destroy the building. They're in a small country, right?
I think it'd be best if one of those arms was only actually useful for wheat threshing, like as a scythe for I like multi-purpose Knocker stuff though.
So just to summarize briefly the guilds that are here. So you have the Ethernauts, who are the scientists and explorers, and totally my favorites. The Builders Guild, who do construction stuff with boggins and actually get along with them sometimes. And they also build the dirigibles and ornithopters. The Toy Makers Guild, Weapons Guild, and Mining Guilds, which I think are all pretty self-explanatory. And then the Disruptors are dangerous, unseelie Knockers who despise the new laws of the Sidhe. And I don't really know what the point of them is. I don't know why they would be like...
I think they're supposed to be like an alternative to the Shadow Court, but still tied to the Fomorians. So I haven't read
I guess so.
Yeah. Because they talk about these just a company of twisted Geru.
Yeah, but it's like if you want to play a goblin without playing a goblin, is kind of the feel I get from it.
Yeah.
And then the monkey's paw. I would have loved to see some kind of historical note that was like the guild system was how Knockers kept themselves together during medieval times. Like that very structured meritocracy around craftsmanship and artisanship. It's like that would have been such a great thing to dig into. But no, we don't get any of that.
So I'm also huge on crossover, and this section isn't exactly without it by mentioning the Brethren of Aether. Two other things I would do is, one, I would have the Builders Guild have some vague mention of wizards they used to work with that seem to have disappeared as a reference to the craft bases.
Yes.
And the second thing I would do is some vague words suggesting that Nockers may in fact be more connected to race than they realize with the guild structure, persisting to the modern day.
Yeah.
Now, if I'm going to, this is where I would mention the Cornish story about Nockers being mining ghosts. And I would just let some implications hang. That this is also connected to me saying that I would have Nockers be more interested in the Sluagh. As I said, like Mage and Wraith are my two primary games, so I see a guild structure and I think,
It's also weird. That just reminds me the earlier part where they're talking about the Sluagh and there's like deliberately, they don't tend to run into each other. I'm like, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you just say, at least say sometimes they do run into each other and interesting things happen?
How about this? Often we run in different circles in the Sluagh, but every so often when a Knocker and a Sluagh are together, strange things happen and the guilds keep it secret.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
One of the major flaws of this book, I think, is kind of speaking to that. It doesn't give me a lot to work with to run a mixed Kith game where the Knockers aren't just pissing everybody off, except for, I'm ashamed to say, the courtly love sidebar. That gives me the most information about how to have a productive encounter between a Knocker and another Kith. And I hate that that's the section that does that.
Now we know what games we need to have.
Yeah.
It's not even a sidebar. It's like a whole
Yeah,
page.
it's true. It's a whole bar.
This is something that it drives me nuts when modern books do it. And a certain modern mage book has sidebars that are bigger than one page, and just it's a section. It's a section. Yeah. This should have been a section.
Right.
Yeah, it'd be easier to read for one thing.
And other sections could have benefited from having this much detail. Like I would have loved to see this much detail when talking about Knocker Freeholds or Dreaming Realms or the code stuff, like any of that.
Like I will say the one thing that just got breezed by that I'm 100% okay with it breezing by is the little 2-paragraph section on page 33 on the Hollow Earth, because
yes,
it should. I would say drop a reference to the appropriate mage book and move on.
Yeah,
like it's not like Mage doesn't reference Changeling books periodically. Just say, if you care about the Hollow Earth, read Book of Worlds and Tradition Book Sons of Aether, and then you can move on. All the stuff that's original to the Knockers needs detail.
The Hollow Earth also doesn't need more, because it would just be... It feels like you can generate that yourself, kind of, if you're not focusing on it.
But why would you want to?
I know the history.
The World of Darkness has enough words about the Hollow Earth already.
Yep.
And storytellers, in my experience, get very stressed about being consistent with the books, which they shouldn't, but they do.
Mm-hmm.
That instead of words, a reference to where other people have written words is a good thing to have.
Yeah.
The attention to stuff like that, where the Hieronymus Continuum, the Hollow Earth, it's stuff that does have analogs in Mage. Again, kind of overall, this feels more like a Mage book than most Changeling books, with the exception of Isle of the Mighty.
Which no one was happy with.
Yeah. This is a rhetorical question, but what is the similarity or dividing line between some of the implications of like the deep dreaming blending into these realms that are sort of in the Umbra, and also outer space, which is also kind of the Umbra? Like, it kind of seems to be doing with those far-flung deep dreaming spaces what Mage does with like Beyond Jupiter or wherever the far horizon is, but it's the dreaming version. And I think it could benefit from kind of articulating that a little bit more. I feel like leaving the line so blurry actually makes it harder for someone to try and work around it.
So I will say that I think that having the lines be blurry is actually really helpful, considering how many people do like running crossover games. People like running crossover games where, the party is mixed, not just the plot.
Yeah,
that's true. Yeah.
And Changeling already throws enough roadblocks at that. It doesn't need more.
It's one of those things where when you look at the existing crossover mechanics that we get that are both inconsistent and often I don't think are helpful for running a game, I kind of prefer Fuzzy over what they would have done, maybe. But like, I also think it's a thing that could be explored. if it's done right. It could be good.
I think you can have fuzzy without being so vague that it's hard to even tell why the words are there in the first place. And I think this book tries to thread that needle without always succeeding.
Yeah.
I will say that my view on considering that this book does have a lot of mentions of mage stuff, my view on what the appropriate crossover rules for Changeling that would fix a lot of problems basically boils down to prodigals are affected by the mists in exactly the same way changelings are. They all have ways to interact with chimerical reality, or when they're enchanted, they can be enchanted for a long time and go. That's kind of all you need to make Changeling play well with others for crossover stuff.
I would love to see just some kind of story hook or mechanic or combination where it basically said, if you go far enough into the dreaming and you find the Hieronymus Continuum, if you cross into the Umbra, presumably deep in the Umbra, and make your way all the way back out, you're unaffected by the mists. So you've had this epic journey all the way into the dreaming and all the way back through the Umbra, and that has allowed you to sidestep, all of that.
Yeah, well, that's a whole other thing for our upcoming book on dreams and nightmares on the mists and changelings and the dreaming. That's another.
Well, if you're unaffected by the mists, doesn't that mean that you can actually learn what changeling history actually was?
There's unaffected entirely by the mist, but I think you mean unaffected by what you remember when you go to the deep dream and come back again, you can't really remember what happened as a changeling.
Look, I ban arcane in my mage games because it makes playing with others tough. And the mists feel a lot like it sometimes.
Speaking of playing with others, courtly freaking love.
Well, now we know where changelings get their porn.
Yep.
Yeah. Which I was amused by that. The note, we're the only ones that can get a camera to work in the dreaming, so the satyrs pay us for filming things. It's like, yeah, that tracks. And then it just gets weird.
Really into specifically skunk puka.
Yeah, that last paragraph, yeah. And what a note to end that chapter on, too. Seriously, the last paragraph of the entire chapter is like...
Would you rather have this or the courtly love bit from Shining Host?
Well, again, because this is a Chris Howard book, more through lines, more courtly love. That would be great if
that's
Courtney
a missed opportunity. Yes, that was a missed opportunity given what it was.
Well, we do turn the page to chapter 3 and cadmium red is right there. And, in terms of the similarities, I don't know.
Some of these knockers just look like Dr. Seuss characters.
Some of them sound like Dr. Seuss characters, too. I do like Cadmium Red as a character, as a villain to be put into a chronicle, because she's like the craven and opportunistic, but really populist Baroness Dictatrix of Goblin Town. And now she's a Dantean, and she wants to tear down her former freehold. And I feel like that's fabulous. I want her to be an arch-villain, and I don't think she's ever mentioned again.
I do like this section in general shows that not all knockers are skinny.
I also noted this chapter is just super short and has no stats for any of these guys, which is a choice.
That's normal for Kithbook.
That's normal for Changeling?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
They always do this for some reason.
I appreciate there being someone named Maxwell Silverhammer, because I think I'm the only one who likes that song, apparently.
I'm also inordinately frustrated by Dr. Tap having larger font than everybody else. I don't know if that's just my copy or...
Oh, God. I didn't even notice, but now I can't not notice.
Sorry.
Why? Why would you do that? Who did the layout on this?
There's also notes that he might still be alive, which would make him in the upper 300s in terms of age.
Well, there's fairy eternity and things like that.
Well, it also would suggest he's out of his mind somewhere in a Lost One freehold.
So we have chapter 4, Young Cusses.
Yeah, it's character templates.
And on the splash art, there's that bear again.
Oh yeah, the bear again. So many people complain about Changeling about that bear when it shows up.
It's true.
Books.
I don't know anything about this bear.
It's I think it's the key point in the argument for why Changeling doesn't belong in the world of darkness.
Right.
It's got this bear, and I think one time he holds a balloon.
Mage did not really give a credit to Mark Reinhagen. That's a pretty strong argument. He had a writing credit on 4 of the 5 core books, first edition.
Yep.
And then there's the weird one. So anyway, templates. They were fine. Templates don't get me excited, usually.
The only one that I was actually really into was the aging Ethernaut. I really liked him.
Yeah, me too. So there's a different stereotype old rich
Yeah.
British man.
Yeah,
Or English man.
he looks like the safari hunter from Jumanji.
Yes. But it's just, I mean, I don't think I would ever play this character, but out of all of them, he's the one that I think is the most fun. I mean, he has a blunderbuss and a trusty boggin sidekick and his own balloon named the Icarus 7. Things like that are just wonderful details.
He has a blunderbuss named Victoria.
Yes.
It's named. That's key.
Work that one out, Dr. Freud.
I could see playing him as an NPC in a game, potentially.
He's just so over the top. And Changeling is probably the game, Mage in a different way, but Changeling especially can handle over the topness better than World of Darkness games in general.
Like, I admit, I kind of roll my eyes at templates that have attributes at 5, and this section does have a couple of those, including the Aethernaut.
It also has character sheets where they've decided mining, chimerical alchemy, and gematria are important things to have on the Knocker sheet. Replacing,
We'll get to that.
performance, law, and linguistics in this second edition thing.
Oh, yeah.
So what, they're going before the best din without law? That's madness.
Apparently.
Yeah.
Well, but apparently the Knockers just treat it like a patent office, so...
Well, I'm just going to say that the aging Aethernaut has intelligence 5. He should know better than to wear that mustache.
It's true. Yeah, the dots... he also doesn't have drive, even though he has an airship. Things like that are a little...
Also, not one of these templates is fashionable.
Truth. Maybe the Master Thief.
The Aethernaut, like, the Adventurous Miner is the least bad, but get some style. Have some pride in your Knocker heritage.
She's kind of like Angela Lansbury mashed up with Rosie the Riveter. The Leash Disruptor, I think, is not a good one to have just because it immediately puts the player in like a really difficult position narratively, and it's like, okay, you're this wild anarchist, nihilist, whatever, but you've been imprisoned and tamed, and now you don't do that. It's like, well, what am I supposed to do with this character? I guess it's supposed to be
Succumb to banality and try again next time.
Yeah.
It reminds me of the kind of players that have had to veto Dark Fate for their characters.
Yeah. Well, it's a little bit like Suicide Squad or Thunderbolts. Like, oh, it's that team of villains who are reformed, but not really reformed, and they could crack at any minute.
But it's just the one like guy. That. He's the only villain.
Exactly.
And he's not even that much of a villain. Yeah,
and you can see the fact that before C20, Changeling seemings very much depended on age. Otherwise, this guy should definitely be a grump.
Yeah. I'm just happy they didn't make him a childling.
Although we do have a childling toy maker at the start. So.
Yeah. Oh, that's okay. But I meant with just that backstory. It's like,
yeah.
And out of what, 5 of these, there's only one childling. Yeah. One childling, one grump, and the rest are wilders. That's fine.
Which again is typical for Changeling.
Okay.
Yeah, that's supposed to be what your PCs were, like the spread roughly.
Huh, someone should tell that to the players.
Yeah. Changeling does mention elsewhere that 1 in 20 changelings is a grump, and the vast majority are wilders, at least in this edition. So.
Well, that bears no similarities to the demographics of online changeling games I've seen.
Correct.
That was also in the 90s,
Right, before they decoupled it from actual mortal age.
Well, but I think also the demographics of players might be different now than it was in 1997. But
yeah, maybe. Anyway, chapter 5.
And then we get the bear. Again.
Oh my gosh,
bear shows up a lot. I didn't notice.
Looks like he's about to vote. So we get some merits and flaws. The merits, I mean, so there's tunnel vision, which kind of gives you dark vision and other forms of enhanced vision. Speedy hammerer, which makes you faster at big projects. Yeah.
See, tunnel vision is, at least is kind of a reference to that mining source material, which there's actually not very many references to. There should have been more of that. If you're going to bring up that story, say something about mining.
Yeah.
I think there's like a miners guild also.
Well, they have it as a secondary ability. So. Or not even a secondary ability. It's on their character sheet. So.
I'm just going to note that removing law and then having the flaw disbarred makes perfect sense. It all comes together.
The flaws overall, I was like,
Yeah.
But,
I mean, the Goblin Magnet seems fun it get old pretty quickly, but
yeah.
I love how the main mechanical consequence of foul mouth is that you should never waste your points on a basilisk stone.
Yes.
Yep.
And if you think that any level of foul mouth is going to stop you from holding a job in human society, you have not seen auteurs.
No, it says respectable job.
Quentin Tarantino exists. Director is
Yeah.
usually considered a respectable job. Just saying.
And he was really big at this point in time, so
Yeah. Like, it seems like 2 free freebie points to me.
basically.
Well, there's this whole other discussion about flaws. This is the kind of thing maybe the other player should get the freebie points for that one. But
Let's not dig into the philosophy behind merits and flaws and how you should get points for them, because that is an entirely different thing than this book.
Yep.
So we get the golem background, which is kind of a mashup of treasure and chimerical companion.
Does it actually? Okay, golems, are they just chimera? Like, does it ever say? Like, the cantrip's chimerical.
Yeah.
It is unclear to me.
I mean, I would read it as they do have physical form. But
It says a botched cantrip roll means this animation process causes physical damage to the golem, so they have physical form.
Yeah. So it's a treasure automaton.
Okay.
That does count as intelligent life.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So then the mining skill, do we treat this as powerful as stone lore in Mage?
It's clearly significantly more powerful. How are you going to get the stones if you don't mine?
It's true.
1 hour per success on dexterity plus mining. And then, oh, look, the hardest rock is difficulty 10, your favorite thing, Charles.
Just call it a coin flip and be done with it. Heads I win, tails I botch.
Chimerical alchemy.
I feel like chimerical alchemy would have made a better art than a knowledge.
Well, this whole... Yeah. I have strong opinions on all
I
these,
do too.
Except for mining less so, but the other ones.
You do your firm opinion first.
Okay. This seems like, hey, we realized we don't have Changeling. You can't actually do these cool things we want Nockers to do, so let's just have you dump a whole bunch of extra points into things to do things that really the system should just let you do.
I think that about sums it up. It has been pointed out that, I think on the Discord channel too, that Infusion as an art was like creating new required systems for stuff that had never been required before. And I feel like chimerical alchemy in particular, because I don't think there's anything that actually necessitates it. Like Infusion takes gematria sometimes, but chimerical alchemy is like sitting there waiting for crafting rules to be created, which we never get.
Yeah, I know Walking Away from Arcadia, I remember they did a rant about this too. Like, it's just pointless. And the art of Infusion just doesn't work with all the other art, the way that most of the other arts work at all.
Chimerical alchemy to me mentions that it's useless by saying that it's not the alchemy knowledge.
Right, exactly.
Yep.
Like, it knows that this doesn't do anything. Like mining, the big difficulty is how do I make this relevant to a chronicle without making it a chronicle about mines?
Yeah.
It's also it's worth remembering that at the same time this was being written, the book that came right after it was Dreams and Nightmares, which does have a much cleaner set and more developed set of crafting rules. And I'm curious how the two books, how they interacted during the writing process as a result.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then there's the gematria knowledge, and I'm not really sure what it's supposed to be doing, honestly.
I think it's just supposed to be sciencey grammar. It's just how it always... And if this didn't exist in the book, I would always... Anything that you would say that this makes sense to roll for, I'd be like, oh yeah, just roll grammar.
I do love the possessed by sections, like skills, mining, possessed by knockers, redcaps, and miners. Chimerical alchemy is possessed by knockers, and gematria, knockers, Talmudic scholars.
Yep.
And meanwhile, if you look at what it describes as gematria here, what does it say about Talmudic scholars?
The quasi-science derives its mathematical language from the ancient Kabbalistic discipline of the same name. Traditional gematria is a Kabbalistic language that converted ancient numerical values for mystic purposes. Knocker gematria creates a flexible mathematical framework for predicting the randomness of chimerical energies. That's a sentence that doesn't mean anything.
Because they had chimerical alchemy, right?
Yeah.
Not regular alchemy. So are they saying, I think they are saying that Talmudic scholars and whatnot, like, actually have that whole FUBAR system and they use it for studying Torah.
Look, if Ars Magica can have actual game mechanics for Talmudic debate, I'm not going to... Whatever. The greatest mage who ever lived was Maimonides, who fixed a vampire in canon. Like,
define fixed.
No, it's just impure. Putting this paradigm onto them is the hilarious part.
Everything is very strange. We just have to roll with it, I guess.
I should point out, any good mage knows that the only real way to fix a vampire is to turn them into lawn furniture.
Yeah.
Oh, also infusion, I know, like, it's also broken. Like, I mean, this is Changeling second edition, of course it's broken, but like level 1 harden is a very good combat art. You can just give yourself lots more health levels.
I think that's level 2. Level 1 is what enables dream stuff to be forged, which seems like a really...
You're right, sorry. Level 2 toughen
Yeah.
is very handy.
Well, and then let's throw in that level 3, let's just like, poof, now I have a foobar. And considering that foobars are supposed to be like the power source for everything, this is infinite energy right there.
Yeah, there's so many issues with this. You have to take Fey 5, and this was back when you had to have Fey 5 to use it, so
Right.
you couldn't go above 2 without having Fey 5.
It's powerful, but it's also very limited use. I can't imagine infusion being used except in a knocker heavy game where everybody really wants to role play through all of the crafting, with the exception of level 2, because that is really useful in combat.
Mm-hmm.
It's so another thing I'm noting is that it seems to me like you can use infusion to just make yourself a better player character. If I remember the starting allocations right, you should be able to start with infusion 4 and Fey 5, right?
Infusion 3, but yeah.
You could with bonus points.
With
You
freebies.
get 3 points for free, but you could buy with bonus points.
Yeah, but you can spend some freebies to get that 4th dot,
Sure.
and then you can make a golem who has 36 attribute points at 5 dots.
Oh, absolutely.
You have 24. That's a lot.
Or, well, you can just do Chimerical Companion and put 5 dots in that background too. But this lets you pump out multiple ones.
Yeah.
So you can just do it again and again.
You can just make yourself an army of better characters.
Kind of like being a Simisi.
Like higher stats.
Yeah. What's a Simisi without the same ethical constraints?
Interesting you should say that, though, because I forget if it's in this part, maybe it's under the level 5, but they do kind of stress the sort of parental responsibility aspect of creating a golem. And I'm actually glad that's in there, because players, if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile, and they would just make that army without thinking about, you are the parent figure to these beings that you have imbued with life. So.
Oh.
Yeah.
No, the most of the players I've had, that would be like their plus for why they do it. And now the game's about like golem daycare.
Which is fine if that's the direction you want to go in.
I read that Discworld book. I'm pretty sure there were like 2 Discworld books that basically revolved around golems.
Yeah.
Though I guess golems is the basis of a financial system. Discworld's great. Read Discworld.
And then we have what's the etymology of that word?
Tchotchkes. It's the Yiddish word tchotchke, just transliterated in the weirdest possible way.
Okay.
Tchotchke is a Yiddish word for like a small object that's more decorative than functional. It's like a trinket, but Yiddish.
Knick-knack, maybe?
Yeah, it's similar to knick-knack. I don't know the etymology, but Wiktionary has an entry for it, so let's find out. It's from the Yiddish tchotchke for trinket, from the Polish kako, which also means roughly trinket.
How does Wiktionary transliterate it, out of curiosity?
Tchotchke.
That's how I've seen it before, so that's how I think of it.
Though that transliteration is an alternate form. I have literally never seen anyone spell tchotchke this way in my life.
Yeah. But we do have quite a few of them, since this is...
Yeah, so there's lots of these, yeah.
I don't know that we need to go into all of them, but do we have favorites to point out?
Did we actually get rules for the computer earlier that the burst tapes reference?
No, but there's the level 3 treasure, the analytical engine, which I guess is kind of supposed to be.
Right, never mind. There, yeah.
Again, something that would have been nice to have more information on overall, but I guess in the 90s, computer stuff wasn't quite so central. I don't know.
Yeah, you can see both digital web books to see how badly 90s takes on computer stuff aged.
Yeah.
So I'm a big fan of chimerical exoskeleton, not for it in and of itself, but because the image of a knocker in a chimerical exoskeleton just burning glamour to make it work on non-chimerical things versus like an iterator in an Allinson hardsuit is just an awesome tableau to build a story around.
I had a character that was trying to get one of those, and the ST just didn't want me to. And it was very...
No.
But yes, I love the chimerical exoskeleton.
I just think the fact that Mage and Changeling can cross over with mech fights is great.
Yes.
Yep.
Things that you didn't know you needed until you did.
There's the mundane weapons rule, which is just like, no.
My favorites are paper-based ones, I guess. So I really like Goblin Parchment and then the astronomical and mining charts, but really the astronomical ones. I love the idea of an astronomical chart on Goblin Parchment, where it's as soon as its recipient gets it, they get to see the super secret path to some particular area of the dreaming before the parchment bursts into flame.
Yep.
That would be great.
That one actually just emphasizes to me a weird contradiction in the nature of the Knockers as per this book, which is if they're so into mining and being underground, why would they have detailed astronomical charts?
Right. As above, so below.
Like the mining and the airships kind of work at cross purposes.
Yeah.
I realized I had a dream after reading this book for review for this, that I was reading the section on Knocker submarines, and then I woke up and was very sad that it doesn't exist.
I mean, it does exist in the dreaming, so.
Mm-hmm. But there's no section in this book on it.
I do like the section on Knocker airships. That's fun. Like Knocker vehicles in general, just fun.
Yep.
Some of them are very underdeveloped.
Yeah, it's like they kind of made a rule system, like half a rule system.
They kind of break them into classes, and it's just like, here's kind of just what these are like in general, and here's a bunch of different possible ones. And then you've got the Ogre Hunter Mark III, which we've seen already in this book. They've reused this art already.
I have the feeling that the balloons may get developed in the near future within the homebrew world, but I don't want to make hard claims about that quite yet. So.
Yeah, they need to use the common vehicle mechanics, so you can have some sort of weird thing where a balloon and a car are chasing each other somehow.
And then, of course, finally the book ends Fubar, which is fitting.
I'd like to point out the artwork on the page with the Fubars of like someone suiting up into a suit of clockwork armor framed by some lovely Tiffany lamps, which fits with the Knocker's attention to fashion, I guess.
So the Fubars here also count as, I can't remember the terminology, but they have willpower, they have intelligence, they have all that stuff.
And dexterity 7.
Yeah, they're used as they're just jammed into batteries and stuff, and that's okay.
That's ethically questionable.
Yeah, considering that they had the big thing about how the ethics around the golems, and like they don't mention at all the ethics around Fubar usage.
There is a sidebar during the infusion art write-up where it mentions capturing wild Fubars as well. So they do occur in the wild, implying they have a society of their own.
Yeah.
And intelligence, too, I would expect as much. That's average human intelligence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, these are as smart as the average person on the street. Of course, those stats are their average, which really, really makes a lot of things about this questionable.
Story hook waiting to happen.
Oh, they also have all the weird read, so they can all physically manifest.
Well, that's the thing, right? They're will-o'-the-wisps, and that's how they appear in the autumn world. And then we get the character sheet,
which we commented on in the templates.
Yeah.
So I guess that's it. That's the book.
So Charles, if you were for some reason running a Changeling the Dreaming game, how would you use this book?
As a jumping off point, I would use fairly little from the book as is.
Mm-hmm.
There are quite a few thematic themes that I like, things in it that I like the idea that it is important to Knockers that they actually have a detailed sort of science of dreams has a lot of potential. I don't like the specific way they did it, but for me at least, it's easy to come up with a fake science because I've been, running Mage forever. I would possibly use some of the treasures, some of the culture bits like Knockers being all about fashion. Just I love that little touch. It's not like anything that I expected to read. It's just some great characterization for them as a Kith. But by and large, I would probably ignore significant fractions of the book and a lot of the stuff I don't ignore. I would be using as a place to something should go here, not this, but something.
Yeah.
So as an outline for what Knockers could be, like if the only thing I had were like the section titles and the sidebar titles and so on, it would give me a place to start.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the details I would not use.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask the sort of flip side of the question, given some of the problematic issues in this book? What, in your estimation, would be a better way to incorporate Jewish themes and Jewish history into Changeling? It's a big question. So
that's a future Storyteller's Vault supplement.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm not even kidding. Once I finish the project I am currently working on, the next thing I'm planning to work on is, generally speaking, Jewish themes in the World of Darkness books. I have notes for one for each game line, and Changeling is, and Mage is probably going to be first because I know Mage cold. But Changeling is quite possibly going to be the second one that I focus on because I have strong ideas about Jewish dreams. I'm still thinking about how I want to incorporate Nockers into that, or if I just want to have a sidebar saying just ignore Kithbook Nockers. No.
Yeah, like I get the impression, at least this is what I would think. It's like, okay, you could play a Jewish knocker just like you could play a Jewish troll or a Jewish buka or whatever, right?
Yeah, you could certainly play a Jewish member of whatever Kith. Be careful about some of them. Like if you have a Jewish red cap, maybe don't eat babies. That gets into some bad tropes. Do a bit of research. I'm generally not a you need to go and read 1,300 books before playing a character of a different culture than you type of person, because that discourages people from even trying. Make sure you know what the tropes to avoid are. Like, again, eating children is something that Jews have been accused of, just in case, I'm going to say falsely, and it has resulted in quite a few problems historically, let's go with. Keyword, if you want more information on that, is blood libel. Like, if you want to keep the Nockers as Jewish, make them maybe less greedy. That's really one of the weird red flags, and be very conscious to make sure that they don't borrow from the sorts of depictions of goblins in other media that was released in 1997. That one's especially sensitive because it's something in that media empire coming out this year is extra super bad on this topic.
I feel comfortable making an executive statement, and Josh, I think you'll support me on this, but if anyone listening to this podcast has any inkling that any of these like stereotypes and awful tropes have any element of truth, you can leave our podcast right now.
Yep. I think what happens a lot is people aren't thinking it through, and they're not.
Yeah, I think that what happened with this book was less malicious and more. I think of research as having levels, and first level research was done, but second level research wasn't, and second level research would have said, "Don't do this."
And it's a common theme in the world of darkness. Unfortunately,
it's also pretty indicative of how, in the same way that we have systemic racism, we also have systemic anti-Semitism that finds its way through all this stuff, which people don't always realize until they dig into it.
Yeah. If you're drawing from cultural, you're like, oh, I saw this in a movie, I'm going to put it in my game,
right?
In my book. And you don't know where it came from. That's dangerous.
And when you throw in the fact that the world of darkness is built on conspiracies and so on, you get to some sketchy places pretty fast. And but on the plus side, the book doesn't have an ethics slur in the title. World of Darkness has not always managed that. So, just given the baseline of how bad World of Darkness has been on an issue like this, just a reminder, it could have been worse. Like this book was almost certainly produced in a well-meaning way without doing sufficient thought. And generally speaking, that is a common problem across World of Darkness, and I am willing to be charitable on that, especially for people who were writing in the 90s when research was more involved and meeting people who were very different from you was more difficult and so on.
Yeah, like if this came out today, I'd have a much, I don't know about you, but I'd have much.
Yeah, I'd be less charitable towards it today.
Yeah.
But I think the thing I'd be least charitable about is we found the truth quark 30 like, come on, look at Wikipedia. So the thing that I'm most forgiving for 1997 is the thing I'd probably be least forgiving for 2023.
Yeah.
Fair. So we do have 2 Discord questions, which are kind of the same question, I think, or 2 parts of the question from Sanchiger. So why is Infusion the best art for playing chimeric necromancers? And then also from Sanchiger, Infusion and Gematria. Why? Thoughts on these?
I'll answer the second one first. I'm pretty sure the answer, as far as the authors are concerned, is why not?
I sort of said this earlier, but my theory is it was trying to add a system by these things instead of let's create a system using the existing stats.
Yeah. It didn't need to be an art, certainly.
Yeah, and also I'm going to say, in the interest of being charitable, I suspect that all of that things like that and all the golem stuff and so on, probably Chris Howard thought, oh, if D&D has this so fully divorced from Jewish stuff and it's wrong, I should include it here and try to get it right, and then
Yeah.
But like, if I'm going to be charitable, read things charitably, and I try to, because I hope people will read my stuff charitable, because I know I'm going to screw up. We all do. There's a very real chance that this was, well, I've got the people that might make these things in Changeling. D&D gets this wrong in this really obvious way. Maybe I can do better. Good try. Didn't work out. A swing and a miss.
Yeah.
And as to Sandshaker's first question, yes.
There's not much alternative when it comes to, I mean, now, in a sense, you could use certain arts to communicate with ghosts or do whatever, but if you were to actually, raise the dead, I could see a Knocker cobbling together some kind of Fubar-powered exosuit to lift up a corpse.
And you do want to start with harden as they're, melting away. So.
But I think also Sandshaker was the one who pointed out that these are features that actually remove functionality from the game, creating rules that add constraints that didn't need to be there. So a lot of it could have been handled by existing arts.
I'll be interested to look back at Infusion when we get to the C20 Player's Guide, because I haven't looked at it carefully, how they changed it. But
yeah. Well, to return to the comment that you just made, Charles, about wanting other people to read your work charitably, what are some things that you're currently working on, and where can people find you around the interwebs?
So I did mention briefly earlier that I'm planning for serious work later this year on Jewish World of Darkness material. Right now I'm trying to finish up a big Mage Storyteller's Vault supplement, reworking the entire focus system. The supplement is a lot bigger than the job actually is, because the rules I have for it are not that complicated, but I decided to update and add detail to literally every example that had appeared, so that people would see what flavor to give things. I hope people like it, because otherwise I have spent months writing something useless. I also have a Patreon. My patrons do seem to like what I've got so far, so that's good. I'm just Charles Siegel at Patreon, and I'm around on Discord. I'm periodically active, let's say, in the Changeling the Podcast Discord. I'll not say anything for weeks at a time, and then for 3 days you'll hear nothing but me. But I am much more active in mage spaces. But Changeling, and including reading Kithbook Knocker carefully, and because I'm that sort of person, I cross-referenced other books periodically while reading it to see, do I understand something correctly, or here's a thing that they just reference, what's actually going on there, things like that. I think once I'm done with this writing sprint I'm in the middle of, I'm probably going to give Changeling another pass through, and it has inspired me to include a Knocker as the antagonist of a game I'm about to run in the Victorian setting.
Nice.
Victorian Knocker thief stealing the plans for an analytical engine from the Order of Reason.
That sounds perfect.
Right on.
Yeah, you can find us at changelingthepodcast.com. You can email us podcast@changelingthepodcast.com. We're on Facebook, Changeling the Podcast. You can send us a toot at changelingpod@dice.camp on Mastodon.
I'm never going to get used to that being the term of record.
I listened to a tech podcast, and they used to make jokes about send us a tweet, and now he just he does it. He just says send us a toot, and he starts giggling. Anyway, yeah. So once again, thanks for joining us, Charles. I'm Josh.
I continue to remain allegedly Buka.
Yeah, and don't mess up the directions of your monads.
Make sure your airship is well fueled and provisioned.
And never lose track of your submarines.
We'd like to take this opportunity to express our support and admiration for the most excellent company of Mongolfierians, Concordia No. 47, our local union of knocker balloonists extraordinaire, without whose expertise the trods to that most sublime dream realm of balloon would remain as yet unexplored. We'd like to reassure that capable bunch of Fae that their efforts to evangelize the glory of balloon and its many permutations, not to mention their manifesto in favor of cleaner, more colorful airways, have not gone unnoticed, for although they are knockers, we consider their words to be an uplifting force and not just a bunch of hot air. If you'd like to help us help them in turn, you can visit our Patreon at www.patreon.com/changelingthepodcast, and as a side benefit for signing up, your support enables us to continue bringing you Fae-flavored whimsy and delight each week. Our patrons also get a shout-out at the end of each episode, which goes something like this: Derek, Dorchadas, Oreo, Raz Caboose, Sandshaker, Sija, and Terry Robinson. Thanks bunches, you all. And if you aren't able to Patreonize us at this time, we still appreciate reviews of our podcast on the listening platform of your choice, or just some word-of-mouth advertising to your boon companions and dire enemies alike. Cheers, and until next time, keep on dreaming.